Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, an interview with the Chief of Staff of the Army on what the force faces in the near future. Plus, a big development in the Navy's case against a sailor accused of setting an assault ship on fire. We hear where that investigation now stands. Also, a look at the Ukrainian Navy's first corvette warship and the international partnership that made it happen. We've got those stories and more in the latest in news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon, here on Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Andrea Scott. Chief of Staff of the Army, General James McConville, has a lot under his purview as one of the force's top leaders. In the run-up to the association of the U.S. Army's annual conference in Washington, he spoke to Defense News' Jen Judson about how the war in Ukraine is shaping U.S. Army modernization and priorities. Here's part of their conversation.
Well, thank you, General, for taking the time to talk with me just ahead of the U.S. Army's Association Conference. We are, many months into watching the conflict in Ukraine play out. So, what are you watching most closely when it comes to Russia and its struggles? And what is this teaching you? And how might this affect areas like modernization or force structure or troop presence in the future? How are you looking at that?
Yeah, I think it's really important, really how the Army came about. We learned a lot from the Arab-Israeli War in 1973, coming out of Vietnam, and that's how we shaped the Army over the last 40 years. And so we're taking the same look at Ukraine, and we're taking a look, is the doctrine right? Our organizations right? Are our modernization priorities the right ones? And it's helping us think our way through that. And even more importantly, are our people programs right? Do we have the right people? And we're seeing, the importance of non-commissioned officers play out, and how we're going to operate in the future in a highly contested battlefield, which we're seeing. And, we're learning some good lessons from that.
Okay. Can you break it down just a little bit in terms of modernization priorities? The Army laid those out 4 years ago, more than 4 years ago, before we saw all of this play out. Did the Army get it right in terms of those priorities based on what you're seeing now play out in this type of scenario? Yeah. Also you're looking at China, which is a completely different beast, but when you look at where you are with the Army modernization priorities, are they right, or do you see some areas for adjustment or more emphasis?
No, I actually think we got them pretty right. Number one priority, long-range precision fires. You look at what HIMARS is doing, the game changer. And quite frankly, for us, that is not long-range precision fires. It's actually shorter range. And then you start to take a look at, imagine if you had PrSM strike missile capability that rides on HIMARS. You would be able to strike, much more command and control, the logistics, and all those type things you have. Imagine if you had PrSM and the mid-range capability that could strike ships. We've seen the value of being able to strike ships and the value that brings. And then certainly with hypersonics, it just gives you the capability to do those type things, and then even extended range cannon. All those things matter in a large-scale combat operations. But what also matters is, some people have said, well, do we need armor anymore? Absolutely. So mobile protected fire, fighting in urban environments is going to be extremely important. The optionally manned fighting vehicle is going to be extremely important. Robotic control vehicles are going to play out for man-unmanned teaming. And then we start to take a look at, the more capable aircraft with future vertical lift, the future attack reconnaissance aircraft, the future long-range assault aircraft. Again, the range and speed and the things that we're going to be able to do are just going to really give us the advantage that we need. And let's not forget about air and missile defense. You know, the ability to shoot missiles down. You know, I've talked before about countering unmanned aerial systems. Absolutely key. And then how we're equipping our soldiers. IVAS is starting to come in, and very excited about that. You know, what I'm trying to, you know, at least caution people, you know, the alpha model, if you will, is a little bigger, more clunky if you want, but the transformational capability is going to be incredible. And then how we're going to arm our soldiers with next generation combat weapons. So I feel we're absolutely on the right track. We'll certainly modify as we go. But what's really important, I think, is we have to deliver. You know, that's what we have to do. We're talking. I like to talk about 24 signature systems and 23. The Secretary talking about that, but we have to make that happen. And you know, we have to keep all these systems on cost, performance, and schedule, and we have to get the resources to make sure they happen.
Okay, in terms of force structure or troop presence in Europe, you know, force posture in Europe has sort of differed in various administrations across your tenure as chief. I think, you know, we've gone from withdrawing and then rebuilding Europe and then going back a little bit. And, you know, obviously now we're looking at increasing force posture in Europe again. So are you content we made the right decisions on force posture in the past, given what we've seen in Ukraine?
Yeah, I do. I think the things that we've been able to do is directly related to the force posture. It starts with a 4-star command. Previously General Cavoli, but now General Williams, and having the command and control structures. We could work very closely with allies and partners, extremely important. Having the theater set for logistics, and so having pre-positioned stocks over there. That's why we're able to get our Armored Brigade Combat Team, and even the 82nd drew equipment from those areas, and then just all the logistics that went along with that. And then having brigades over that could rapidly reinforce our allies and partners was extremely important.
So in terms of Army pre-positioned stock and the fact that you've been able to draw on that in recent months, you know, are you seeing any areas where you might want to, you know, beef up Army pre-positioned stock in Europe? Are you determining that maybe we have the right balance right now? Do we need different locations? Where's the Army in terms of looking at that?
Well, we're certainly taking a look at, you know, the future posture, and that's going to be really determined by, you know, kind of what's happening in Europe over the next couple of years. You know, we'll provide options, but the takeaway for me from pre-positioned stock is, well, first of all, you want to have pre-positioned stock in the areas where you think you're going to need it. That saves time. That's the way we were able to take the 1st Brigade, 3rd Infantry, which is an Armored Brigade Combat Team, and basically have it in place, shooting on a range in 7 days. That, if we had to put it on ships and move it, the physics wouldn't allow us to do that. But more importantly, so you need to have it there. It needs to be modernized because you don't want to have old equipment in pre-positioned stocks. That's not very helpful. So we did. And the third thing is it needs to be ready to go. You know, it has to be ready equipment. And then even what was very helpful was the fact that we had rehearsed moving, you know, with our allies and partners, equipment through Europe allowed us to move it very, very quickly, so that the right transport was available to make that happen.
Okay. In terms of what units may be asking for in Europe now that, you know, we're observing what's happening in Ukraine and that's influencing things, you know, are you seeing units urgently ask for things like, you know, better active protection system for their vehicles? You know, obviously we have active protection systems on Abrams, but not yet on Stryker or Bradley. So anything you're looking at sort of accelerating that, you know, hasn't moved as quickly as you wanted, or, you know, potentially 155 millimeter howitzers, things like, you know, the Army was evaluating about a year or so ago for potential deployment for units in Europe. Anything that you're looking at that may have been backburnered for a little bit, but given what we're seeing now might change?
Well, I mean, the first thing we want to do is replenish all the ammunition and weapon systems that we've done, you know, and we want to replenish with modernization. So what I mean by that is, you know, we've provided M113s, armored personnel carriers. We don't want to replace them. What we really want to do is take the AMV, the armored multi-purpose vehicle, and replace them if we can. And that's what we're working with Congress. You know, some of the systems are like the 155s, you know, we'd want to replace with HIMARS and taking a look at that. So as we come out of it, we don't want to, you know, as I like to say, buy new old stuff. What we want to do is buy new things and make sure we're doing that. But again, we're taking a hard look at everything, and even it's not just material solutions. It's also how we operate and reinforcing, the idea that, having a non-commissioned officer corps is extremely important if you're going to do the type of operations that we need to do. Logistics are extremely important if you're going to, support an operation like this, because the rates of utilization for ammunition, especially with artillery, is fairly high in a large-scale combat operation.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned, and as you retire from the Army next year, the hope is that the service is able to get 24 systems, signature systems out of the 35 plus systems that fit into your Army modernization priority portfolio into soldiers' hands in FY23. So what challenges are you up against, as the service tries to meet these goals? What are some of the things that could potentially derail this? I mean, we're looking at inflation and some other things, but what are some of the things that concern you in terms of getting to this point with all these systems?
Anytime you're fielding a new system, we're doing soldier touch points along the way, and you're going to have things that don't go right. As you have new missiles and new systems. It's a learning process. We're doing it very, very quickly, and when you do that, you take risk. But what I think is really important is getting to the alpha model, if you will. Get the capability set, get it in the hands of soldiers, then we'll incrementally improve it over the next couple of years, and then you have it as a program of record, and it's got the support to go forward, and then we can bring in all the things that need to go along with it, the doctrine, the organizations, the facilities, and all those things that have to support it. But I think, as I take a look at history with chiefs of staff, and I think Marshall said it the best before World War II. He said, when I had the time, I didn't have the resources, and when he got the resources, he didn't have the time. So we're trying to find a balanced approach. Well, we have some time and some resources to get as much done and get the organic industrial base set and get the modernization in place, and then if something happens, we can rapidly spin it up if we need to do that.
And in other news from around the military, more U.S. support for Ukraine is on the way. The Biden administration's next aid package is set to contain more high-mobility artillery rocket, or HIMARS, systems to the embattled nation. Also in the latest tranche are MRAP vehicles, howitzer rounds, and mines. The New York Times also reported this week that U.S. European Command would establish a new mission to oversee how American forces train and equip Ukrainian forces. And U.S. service members and guardsmen were busy last week with aid and recovery missions following Hurricane Ian's arrival in Florida. The powerful storm caused a devastating surge that prompted authorities to send out everyone from National Guard to Customs and Border Patrol to help in rescue and recovery efforts. Troops provided water and helped evacuate residents impacted by the storm. And finally, Space Force Guardians are now eligible for more potential awards, including the Bronze Star and the Air Medal. Recently, President Joe Biden signed an executive order expanding the eligibility to the military's newest force. Guardians can now also be nominated for a Good Conduct Medal, Presidential Unit Citation, and Defense Distinguished Service Medal. When we come back, Ukraine unveils its first ever corvette warship amid its battle to push back Russian forces. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Andrea Scott. Since the early days following the fire that consumed the amphibious assault ship Bonhomme Richard, the Navy has pursued a lone suspect as the cause of the blaze. Now, 2 years after the disaster, a major upheaval in the case to prosecute that sailor brings an end to the Navy's bid to assign blame for the fire. So what happens now? For more on the continued fallout of the fire and how the Navy plans to avoid similar mishaps, we turn to Navy Times' Jeff Zazulowicz.
It has been more than 2 years since a raging fire destroyed the amphibious assault ship Bonhomme Richard while it was undergoing maintenance at a San Diego pier. And while the recent acquittal of a sailor accused of starting that fire signals an end to the legal saga of the ship, the Navy's surface fleet is still grappling with the effects of losing the $1.2 billion flat top. Sailor Ryan Sawyer Mays was found not guilty on September 30th of arson and hazarding a vessel charges in connection to the Bonhomme Richard fire.
Grateful that this is finally over. It's been a long 2 years.
That decision came after his attorney reported that a preliminary hearing officer recommended that the Navy not take Mays to trial back in February. But the Navy did take him to trial, and during the proceeding, the Navy offered no physical evidence tying the 21-year-old to the fire's origin in a cargo hold, leading some to accuse the service of scapegoating the junior sailor. The prosecution framed Mays as a bitter sailor who failed to make it through SEAL training and was resentful that he had ended up doing menial work aboard Bonhomme Richard. The defense questioned the credibility of a key witness who reportedly changed his account of events as the months progressed. So the sailor who the Navy charged with arson has walked. Where does that leave the Sea Service today? For all intents and purposes, the Navy's investigation into Bonhomme Richard is over. But the Sea Service continues to grapple with the fallout. In terms of preventing future similar disasters, the Navy instituted a raft of reforms that are now being rolled out. Whatever caused the Bonhomme Richard to catch fire on July 12, 2020, was only really part of that ship's ultimate disaster. That's because it burned for days after that, and a massive investigation later revealed firefighting failures up and down the chain of command. Those failures in command and control and basic firefighting fundamentals caused the ship to sustain so much damage that the Navy decided to scrap it altogether. All told, more than 24 Navy members were disciplined for their failures to fight the 5-day inferno. Those disciplined included everyone from the ship's command triad to retired Vice Admiral Richard Brown, who was the head of Naval Surface Forces at the time. Earlier this year, Brown called the secretarial letter of censure issued against him a quote-unquote political hit. Big Navy has also instituted a raft of reforms that it says will help make sure that a ship doesn't catch fire and fatally burn while undergoing maintenance in a shipyard. A major fires review released a year ago found a series of troubling commonalities among 15 major shipboard fires in the past 12 years. Among the main commonalities were fires that broke out when the ship was in a reduced manning status while on maintenance. That review also found flammable items improperly stowed away and a propensity for sloppy hot work. In short, standards had gotten too loose during extended maintenance periods, providing the conditions for such an inferno to be called away. That probe also found that lessons learned weren't being shared across the fleet following such mishaps. The Navy underwent a similar period of reflection and reform after arson destroyed the submarine Miami back in 2012. Some of the reforms implemented back then were not followed during the Bonhomme Richard fire. And in the end, only time will tell if the Navy has truly learned its lessons from the inferno.
Thanks, Jeff. Next up, it's this week's edition of Defense Dollars. The launch of the Ukrainian Navy's first corvette warship was hailed on Sunday by Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. His wife, First Lady Olena Zelenska, had been present for the inauguration of the Turkish-built corvette in Istanbul. He added his top presidential aide also had met with representatives of the Turkish defense company Baykar, who manufactures drones heavily used by Ukrainian forces. Acknowledging the Ukrainian military's gains in retaking an eastern city from Russian forces, Zelensky again dismissed Moscow's recent attempts to illegally annex several Ukrainian regions. Colombia is launching a $2 billion shipbuilding program that would see its Navy acquire 5 frigates. The announcement made last week was followed by the signing on Tuesday of an initial contract between local shipbuilder Cotecmar and Dutch company Damen to adapt its design to meet the Colombian Navy's requirements. A Colombian military source told Defense News that a definitive contract will most probably be signed during 2023, with an actual building to start late that year. Colombia's far-left president had campaigned on a promise that military expenditure would not be a priority. Since entering office in August, he's changed his approach, which some credit to the influence of his defense minister, Ivan Velasquez. NATO says the Army deployed advanced rocket artillery to Latvia as part of the Baltic countries' exercise Silver Arrow 22. A U.S. Air Force MC-130J Commando II plane transported to the country's western coast. NATO says the HIMARS gives it the ability to conduct powerful, long-range precision strikes. NATO added that should a crisis occur, U.S. Special Operations Command Europe is experienced in deploying the systems that it needs to be able to rush the launchers to most places in Europe with short notice. A NATO and United Nations team got together to help Jordan better manage chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear incidents, as well as disasters and terrorist attacks. NATO says the 3-year project built up in a demonstration near the country's capital, Amman, where Jordanians responded to a simulated radiological attack. NATO says this is the first time it has worked with the UN to enhance the security capabilities of a NATO country. NATO says its defense and related security capacity building initiative is one of several partnership programs developed by NATO to help partner countries improve defense. The announcement added that assistance packages include helping with counterterrorism, improving information protection, and cyber defense. When we return, our personal finance expert tells you how to protect your child from identity theft as they begin to open their bank accounts and credit card accounts. Welcome back. On this edition of Money Minute, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Jeanette Mack talks about avoiding risks as your teenager gets their first credit card and bank account.
Right now, identity theft is at an all-time high. It's unfortunate, but the truth is anyone and everyone can fall victim, even kids. Teens and young adults get targeted because they usually don't have credit history. Their clean credit slates are attractive to fraudsters who use their name to open credit accounts and take out loans. Unfortunately, this can go undetected for many years as parents don't typically check their children's credit reports. So make it a habit to check every 6 months to a year and correct or report inaccuracies or suspicious accounts. This way, your kids can confidently apply for a loan or their first credit card at 18 without fear of a compromised account. Anytime you feel like your child's credit could be compromised or want to keep things under control until they're ready for credit, you can call the credit bureaus and place a security freeze on their credit report. Remember to call each one separately to be thorough. And when the time comes, thanks to your vigilance and care, your teen or young adult's good name and clean credit file will be ready to take that next step in a successful credit journey.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next time. To get more coverage of our military and defense issues, head on over to Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps Times.com and DefenseNews.com for more stories. And if you want to get even farther ahead of your fellow troops or shipmates with news, sign up for our Early Bird Brief for headlines each weekday. And get the latest on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. And when we come back, we've collected some classic recruiting ads from decades past. And time for a little fun. Did you join the military because of a great commercial? What about a bad commercial? Either way, we've collected some classic recruiting ads from decades past and thought we would take you out this week with one of them. Let's check it out.
for a few proud men. Men of adventure. Men of courage. Men who knew the meaning of honor. There still are the Marines. We're looking for a few good men.
That's all we have time for this week. Please visit us on militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more coverage. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.